Hi there. So architects, we are too expensive, and this is something that is just come up recently. And do you know what? Sometimes I agree, and I think there are lots of different factors to this that I'm going to go into. I'm going to talk through, and this might become a little bit of a rant, so I'm just warning you now. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what you think. Do you feel that architects are too expensive? Have you decided not to use an architect because they're too expensive? Or are you worried that an architect will be too expensive and not just their fees will be an additional cost, but they will make your project more expensive than it needs to be? So I'm really interested to know what you think, and I'd love to know, so please do pop any comments down below and let me know, because I'm really curious about this. But also there are a few things that I've come across, and I'm going to sort of give you a bit of background. So I'm Jane. I help eco-conscious homeowners to transform their period property into beautiful, characterful, but also comfortable and planet-friendly homes that suit a modern lifestyle. And I set up my own architecture practice in 2009. So, 11 years ago now. And to be honest, way back then, I was far too cheap. So in my very first year, I earned a grand total of about 500 quid. So, I wasn't charging enough at all. I was really sillily cheap. And probably some of the struggles that I had back then to get clients were because people thought, well, like, that's a bit cheap, so what's she gonna do? She must be really rubbish. And I wasn't really rubbish. I was a really experienced architect. I'd been a senior architect in an education in the education team of a huge multinational, well, actually it was the 4th largest architecture practice at that time in the world. And I really knew what I was doing. I was leading teams designing multi-million pound huge new build high schools. And, I was a skilled, experienced architect, but I had no idea about business at all and had no idea how much to charge for my services. And, like many creatives, that whole business side of things is something that I've really had to work on learning and improving over the last 11 years of running a business. And at the time of starting, I really kept my eye on my own lane. I didn't really look at what my competitors, my colleagues in the industry were doing, and I didn't really have a clue how much they were charging for their services, how they were charging, on what basis. And so it's sort of over with time, I've sort of heard people, people have told me little things and of how things are run by other architecture practices. And honestly, in some cases, I kind of find it a bit disgraceful how people charge, and how much they charge is kind of up to them. But it's not so much the quantity that I think, it's the basis on which they charge, which I don't agree with. So, in a kind of a historic background to how architects charge, there used to be an architect's fee scale, and architects used to charge based on a percentage of the overall cost. And the type of project that, whether it was a residential project, a big commercial project, public sector project, whether it was a project working with more complexity, so perhaps a conservation, working with a very historic, sensitive site or building, or some other sort of aspect of it being particularly complex, say an underground house or something like that, or a passive house maybe. So those different levels of complexity would add to the percentage, so they get higher. And also sort of the scale of the project would lower the percentage. So for example, the multi-million pound new build high schools that I was working on, the practice that I was working for, I think we were getting about 5%, but 5% of, about 30 odd million pounds. So still quite a chunk of money for that project. And bearing in mind, there would be, say, me and maybe one or two very junior members of the team to deliver the project. So there wasn't a huge amount of expense in a sense, apart from, we were using much more expensive software and all sorts of fancy coffee and biscuits meetings regularly and those sorts of things. So there were more big overheads, fancy city centre office and all of that. But the percentage was quite low as a percentage of the construction price. Whereas, say, maybe for a conservation, private residential, the fee scale would maybe say something around 13-15%. So this was sort of like historical architecture fee scale. And that fee scale used to be published on a yearly basis, revised and published by the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and that would be published every year, and then architects would use that as their benchmark to figure out how much to charge for their projects. And so most architects charged around the same amount, and that practice was banned basically. So the RIBA no longer updates and publishes that fee scale because we're not allowed to do that. It's seen as a monopoly practice, and it's fee fixing, and it's not considered to be a thing that architects should be doing, and we should be looking at our own, making our own businesses more cost effective, the way that we run our practices more efficient, and figuring out our profitability in a different way. And so we shouldn't be fee fixing our prices in that way. So I'd love to know what you think about this. Have you seen the fee scale? Do you know what the fee scale was? Or have you imagined that an architect would charge you a percentage of your build costs as the basis of charging for their services to you? And did you know that wasn't allowed? Not in terms of, it is allowed for an architect to charge for their services as a percentage of your construction cost. That is allowed, but it's not allowed for all architects to assess all of our fees and then compile a sort of a graph, a chart that we can then all pick from so that we're all charging roughly the same amount. That's what's not allowed. The comparison and the collation of the data and using that for everybody to charge a similar amount, that's what's not allowed. But charging a percentage of your fee, that is allowed. Anyway, I looked at the fee scale and tried to figure out how to use it, and it just honestly didn't make any sense to me to charge that way, because first of all, for clients, there's a fear that, well, if the architect's earning a percentage of the end price, then surely they're just going to make the project more and more and more expensive, so the end construction cost is higher, and then their fee is also higher. So I can understand from a client's perspective how that would not, that I don't think that's acceptable for clients, and I don't agree with that being the basis for you to be paying. But from an architect's perspective, if you are working really hard to bring down the cost of the project, and then perhaps doing lots of revisions, so you might design something, works out it's too expensive, so you then do lots of revisions and you work quite hard to bring that price down. And all that work, which in jargon is often called value engineering. So once you've done all that extra value engineering work, then you're actually getting paid less, because despite all the work you've done to bring the project in under budget. So you've designed it and then redesigned it to bring the costs down, but all the extra work that you've done to bring it down into budget, you're not getting paid for, because you're still getting paid a percentage of the fee that you could, if you just managed to design that first time round, then it wouldn't have cost you the same. I don't know, does that make sense? I'm not sure I've explained that really well, but anyway, it doesn't work for anyone. charging as a percentage of the end construction value doesn't work for clients and it doesn't work for architects. And so it's a rubbish system, and very few, if anybody, still works that way. Perhaps for the really huge scale building projects where you're talking about multi-millions and the actual overheads are relatively low and you can make a huge amount of profit from that, maybe there. But that's the only case. Not for smaller scale projects and smaller practices, it doesn't work. So the way that I decided then to start charging, after having looked at the fee scale idea and struggled with that and not figured out how to make it work for anybody's benefit, I decided to start packaging my services and charging for those packages, because I could control how much work went into each package. I could assess at the end of that package then how much work was going to be taking part in the next package and price for that accordingly. It was a fixed price, so for clients it's very clear how much you're going to be paying. You're completely in control. If that price is too much, then we could revise the content of the package so that I didn't do as much work but you pay the right amount. So those are the sorts of things that I was doing. I don't do that anymore. I have fixed packages and they're for fixed amounts, and they're amounts that I think are reasonable, and many clients who work with me also think those prices are reasonable. But they mean that there's a certain amount that is delivered for a certain price, and I think that it actually works out as very good value for money that way. And I feel that that's important, because I think for clients you should feel confident and you should be in control of your project, because it's your project at the end of the day and it's your money and the end result is for you. So you need to be, I feel, in control and confident and happy with the end result. As you go through the whole process, you should be feeling that way. Not worried or wondering, what's going on, how much is going to cost me, all of that. I don't think you should be having those sorts of doubts and worries at all. So because I do my work in packages, I go through a very rigorous briefing process, and it's getting more and more rigorous the way as I develop my practice. And I've done that so that I really understand my clients and I can properly design so that you get what you want. And because I actually don't like doing lots of work like over and over again, I like to do something really well once, maybe make some alterations to it, develop a little bit, but I don't want to have to be reinventing, redesigning constantly all the way through to get to something where there's just loads of compromises, such a mishmash. I prefer it to be much cleaner process where, it's more enjoyable for me and it's more successful for the client. And because of that, I think the most important thing is to get your vision as a client, get what you want really clear from the outset, and then base all the design work on that. So that is where I focus a lot of effort now. But I've recently found that, there are some architects and certainly other people who are not architects. Okay, there's two different bands. So there are the people who are not architects who do just the same thing as an architect, and they don't really listen to their client most of the time. They do a very standard design. They've done the same sort of thing on all of the houses of that type, and it's fairly cookie cutter, copy paste type of a design. Very simple, very straightforward, very, very cost effective for what you're getting, but probably not really what you want. But then, it depends on, what do you want? How much do you want to pay? I've had lots of people come to me after having worked with someone who wasn't really an architect, and they've said to me, oh, well, we weren't happy with the architect that we worked with before. And I've said to them, well, who was it? Because I'm nosy and I want to know, I'm curious. And actually often, almost always, it wasn't an architect at all that they worked with. They didn't work with an architect. It was someone who doesn't have the same design skills, but maybe has good technical skills, but doesn't have quite the same approach to design. And so they hadn't felt listened to. What they really wanted wasn't echoed at all in the design. And so they were really quite dissatisfied with it, and they didn't want to progress that design through to getting it built. And so then after that, they came to me, and that's happened multiple times. I've also had once or twice people come to me after having worked with a real architect. And just recently, I was speaking to some family members of mine who didn't want to work with me, quite understandably, because, you know, working with family can be tricky and, you know, something to be careful about. And so they decided to go their own way, find an architect. They did due diligence, got somebody recommended, worked with someone local to them. And this person just hasn't gone through a briefing process with them at all, has charged for one iteration of a design, and then is charging by the hour for all alterations. And I just think that that's actually disgraceful, because there's no incentive. So if I, as an architect, did that, I would be like, great. I mean, it's fantastic for an architect, isn't it? I mean, how do you know how many hours they're spent working on it? Put the timer on your, you know, that project, and go and make yourself a cup of tea, work away, do the project, come back. You know, there you go. It took me 7 hours, 14 hours, 21 hours, whatever. You've no idea how long it's really taken, but it's all been done on an hourly basis, and you're still not happy with the design. You still want more changes, and so you're going to end up paying for more and more and more and more hours until you get to a point where you're happy with the design. I just think that's wrong. I just don't think you should be in that position. And I think actually architects who are charging in that way, where you're completely out of control, completely in the dark, completely mystified, and you've not been helped to create your brief and, you know, figure out what you really need to start off with. And I think that as an architect, I feel like that's my duty, to make sure that I am fully understanding what my client needs and what they really want, and then designing based on that. And if there's not been enough of a conversation, in this instance there was a 1 hour chat, that to me, that's not enough. It's a huge amount of analysis, evaluation, lots of different processes and exercises to go through to figure out what you really, really want and what you really, really need, and then to use that as the basis of the design. And I can almost guarantee that doing that is the only way you're going to get a good result at the end that you're happy with. And if somebody hasn't done that, they've just kind of half listened to you, it's great, it's fine if that architect is almost exactly like you. So if you find an architect who's very similar to you, has similar lifestyle, similar, you know, ways they do stuff, great. They might then they'll be designing for themselves if they've only done a moderate amount of a chat to figure out what you want, and then they'll design based on their own assumptions about what you want and need, and take it from there. And you might be lucky that what they assume is right, and then you may, you know, just pay that flat fee for that design and not really need to do very much in the hourly rate basis. But, you know, if you're stuck paying hourly rate fees and you don't know how long it's going to go on for, just stop. I just don't think that's it's not the right approach at all. It's the way things have been done in the past, and it's no longer the way that works in almost any circumstance. Even, I mean, contractors as well, builders, tradesmen, they used to work much more like that. And now you'll find that if you ask them for a fixed fee, they can give you a fixed fee because they have an idea about how long it will take to do it. And the more practice they are This works for everyone. If you're more practiced, you know, you've got an idea of how long it's going to take, and it's your incentive to deliver that in the shortest amount of time possible, the most efficient time, and to get your clients to that point where they're happy and you've completed the project, you've satisfied that. Now, obviously, there's always going to be times and places and clients that you can't satisfy as an architect or as a tradesperson. You know, you can't please 100% of the people all the time, but you know, you're much more likely to. And as a client, if you're paying somebody for a fixed service, a package, a fixed fee, you're completely in control. You know what to expect. You know what the result is that you're expecting from that, and you know how much it's going to cost you to get that result, instead of, you know, being completely at sea, not knowing. I just think that's wrong. And I do think if you're just constantly going back for revisions, and you're still not happy, and you're just racking up this huge fee, and then I think it's way too expensive, and you shouldn't be ever in that position. That's my view. I'd love to know what you think. If you've worked with an architect and that's how they charge, how did you find it? Did it end up really expensive? How did you give up? Or did you carry on? How much longer did it take to get to the point where you were happy with the design? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please pop them below. Any comments, give me a thumbs up, heart, anything you like. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll speak to you again next week. Bye for now.